We want to talk a little bit about roots of poverty and homelessness, and it isn't just, people had some bad luck, or they had drugs, or they, had emotional problems. There's some of that going on, but there's a structural component to poverty and homelessness that gets right down to the social fabric, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in a little while. But first, I want to introduce Mike Davis. He's with the Knowing Me Ministries. It's just in Portland here, right?
Yes.
Knowing Me Ministries. Yeah. And he was on. Who was with you then?
Allison Hilkaya.
Allison. She was excellent
the Lentz
as well.
Neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah. They were talking about the Lentz neighborhood, and there was some real issues with that. The folks were banding together and helping each other out in these little camps. And as soon as they got things squared away, ODOT would come in there and demolish them. And now some of the places they brought in these big, large boulders and stopped them completely. There's not going to be anything going on there now. Yeah. Although there is a tent and a bicycle and a couple things right underneath the overpass right now that they've ignored for a few days. So, because that's right in my neighborhood. But you were working on that. What kind of work were you doing, and where is that now? Before we move on to the northwest part of town.
Right. So, those boulders you mentioned, by the way, it looks ugly now.
It does.
And they're trying to remove the homeless from there, who they thought was making it look ugly. But wow, I mean, just throw some boulders under I-205 in Foster. And it's a lot of people have commented to me just what a sight for sore eyes that is now. And so, the last time I was here, ODOT had just done a major camp sweep at 92nd Flavel, and we had, unfortunately, a gentleman that died from exposure during time. Everybody lost their belongings, so we had gotten everybody some supplies again so they could stay warm at that point, and it has been filed in federal court, a lawsuit to create boundaries and rules about how ODOT and state agencies can approach the homeless. And so we're working on that right now. It's on hold at the moment. That tends to happen in a case that's this big, and when you're dealing with a state agency such as ODOT, it's going to take a while to deal with this issue. It's going to be held up in courts for a while, and you're just going to just have a lot of downtime, and then court time and downtime.
That's a tactic,
Yeah, so we're in one of those holding patterns at the moment. So
that dog paddling, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where that is, and it's important to recognize that that is part of what they are doing to, hopefully people will get tired and walk away, and the momentum will be lost, and it may or may not. And sometimes it works to the benefit of the citizens when these things go on and on forever too as well. And but you've moved on to the northwest, and that's where I picture homeless more often, is in the, in the northwest, southwest, downtown. And there's been a camp there right at the city hall. I mean, I'd be there now, but it's been there for some time. And then there's the one that was shown on the video there, the R2D2.
Yes.
Is that still there, I believe?
Yeah.
They're trying to bribe them everything they can to get them out of there. So is that where you're talking about in the northwest, or you have other?
The area, I was working in southeast before along 82nd, but now I'm working in the area between 405 and 23rd Avenue and Burnside to Thurman. That area that I believe they call that the Alphabet District. Yeah, that's the area I'm working with the homeless in, because there's there's camps in that area, but it tends to be more the people that sleep in a different spot each night, because they're not setting up camp, they're just sleeping for the night and moving around during the day.
Well, it makes it more difficult for them to be rousted if they're not in the same place every night. That might be part of what they're doing then.
Yeah.
That's their tactics.
At least, yeah. Yeah, the less you have, the less that can be taken from you, I suppose. But yeah.
That reminds me of something I was thinking about. I was sitting the other night, and I had a chair by me, and all these things. I had a coffee cup, and I had pens, and I had different things, and it just piles up. Yeah. Everybody does that. It's papers. And you think about it, that's our lives. We have so many things, and to the folks that are homeless, houseless as some people put it, those things aren't so expendable to them. I mean, the things that they have are very important to them.
Right.
Because many of them are multifunctional. They help them out in more than just one way. Right. And it's just terrible to go in there and abscond with all those things, and maybe they get them back, maybe they don't.
Right.
But if they don't get them back, then that's devastating.
Right. That was one of the problems we were having in Southeast with their belongings being taken either by the city or by ODOT, and they don't get it back. I mean, there's ways they can get them back, but it's not very well known unless somebody like me that knows how to get it back, is they're never going to get it back because they don't know what to do. And so, yeah, they lose all those things, you know. And it kind of reminds me, you're talking about things piling up. You know, we often look at the homeless maybe as a problem or whatever, but I think there's things we can learn from them as well, is that we can live and be happy on very little, you know, because there's a lot of homeless people that are quite happy, you know, not happy with their situation, but they just choose to say, this is my situation, I'm going to make the most of it, you know. So yeah.
Well, I know sometimes, you know, when I was younger, I had a lot less, and I was less harassed and harried by the stuff that I have, because then
Right.
you gotta take care of it, you gotta keep track of it, and you know, the simpler life, you know, maybe not a beggar's bowl and a blanket like in East
Right.
India, after they spend their lives living their lives, and then when they get older, they leave their families and they get off into the jungles, and they just live a very simple life. Well, that's one extreme, but there are a lot of lesser extremes that
exactly.
that would be probably less stressful, because you know our society is so stressful. And with that word society, you know, we can get into what we were talking about. We were wanting to talk a little bit about on the show is the roots of poverty and homelessness. That fella kind of ran it down, you know, with all the issues that we're spending money on Iraq wars and all these different things.
Right.
It's the mentality and the direction that society is going in that creates maybe in the backwash, but I think it's more deliberate than that. It creates homelessness and poverty.
Yeah, exactly. And I was talking to somebody today, just the simple concept that in a village society, like you have still in some parts of the world, you don't have homelessness. You know, where everybody's just got these simple structures. And you were talking earlier about like Native Americans. You know, they lived in teepees and didn't really have homeless. But then when you have a developed society like ours, where home becomes now a structure, and as time goes along, a bigger and bigger and bigger structure, then you end up with people that can't afford those structures that we call houses. And so then because of that, you then have homeless. And so now we've got two classes of people. We have a class that has a structure called a house and a class that doesn't. And suddenly that becomes your value. The people that can afford that structure have value, and the ones who can't don't have value. And so, yeah, we've created just that one simple mindset right there has created homelessness, not to mention, you know, the many things in our society that does. But, yeah.
Well, the structures is a good word, because the institutions, as you become more complex, the institutions that are formed in society, they are structures as well.
Yeah.
And they become more pronounced and more solid. And if you don't have a home, then you're homeless. But if you can't fit into the very solid structures, then you become alienated. You know, like Native Americans, they had institutions for Native Americans that members of their tribe that were what we would call gay or cross-dressers. They had a place in society. People who were a little bit emotionally or mentally disturbed had a place in society. Nobody was alienated.
Right.
And you drive around downtown, you drive anywhere with the homeless, those people are alienated from society. And even though some of them work, they're not a part of society.
Right.
I think quite a few of them work, actually.
Yeah, there's quite a few. That's what a lot of people don't get, because I've heard, you know, Lars Larson say they just need to get jobs, and I've heard other people say that, and it's just like, it's not that simple of a task, because for one thing, a lot of them do have jobs, and they get incomes, but it's just not enough to match the growing demand, especially now. I've been noticing lately just how much of a demand for money our society has on us, because you got to, you know, this thing and that thing and another thing, and before you know it, you're consumed. Because like if you have a house, well, then you got to have insurance on that house, and you got to pay utilities and upkeep, and all those things. And after a while, some people, man, I can't do that. You just can't keep that pace day after day.
Mm-hmm.
And some of our people who are mentally ill, who are homeless on the streets, they haven't always been that way. There just came a point in their life where they just crashed under the weight of everything. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It occurs to me while you're talking that whether it's society in Africa or Native Americans or South America, they're dealing with concrete things, and they got to get food, they got to cook food, they have to deal with things that are concrete. But in our societies, everything is more abstract. Not only do we have a symbolic thing of money, but now you can't rent I think, what is it? Like you want to rent a Red Ryder to move,
right.
or you want to get let's say a plane ticket. You got to have credit cards.
Yeah.
And that just is one step more symbolic, one step more away from flesh and blood and animate, concrete things. And it some people don't do well with that. I don't do well with that.
Right. Exactly. And there's so many things, I think, in American society, especially, I can speak from that since that's where we live, but in American society that, just like you said, is not flesh and blood. I mean, like our credit card system. I mean, when you swipe a credit card, somebody, New York or London or somewhere, is getting that money, and you don't know who that person is. There was a day, in the agrarian societies where you had to meet face to face and make a deal and trade a goat for a candle or something.
Yeah, or a bushel
of
weed
candles
or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we have all those things that are just, less and less flesh and blood. I was talking to somebody earlier today. I said, I love sports. I was thinking about the Blazers game coming on tonight. And I said, man, I love sports, and I like listening to guys on sports talk about these things. But I was like, there's a job that has nothing to do with anything, and yet these guys get rich by just talking about sports all day on the radio.
Yeah.
and things, and what those types of things do, whether we realize or not, is they cause us to lose our humanity, so that now I see the world as numbers and plastic and metal, rather than seeing the people, the real people around me.
Mm-hmm. The relationships.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's important for those relationships, and I imagine if we didn't alienate people through our social mores and different things, those plastics and those credit cards and those things wouldn't be so devastating. But the fact is that people are separated from one another, whether it's from driving around in their cars. I mean, that was, to me, the first people first got separated. Now then they were in front of their computers, which separates them even more. And then now they're walking around, sometimes sitting next to someone over there, and we watched somebody in a restaurant the other day. I think it was the Olive Garden, and there was two people sitting across from one another, each one on their phone.
Yeah, right.
Hopefully they weren't on the phone to each other.
Call me.
But still, it's getting so complicated. And I can't say there's always been homeless, but I think about Western culture, and even in a culture maybe in the East, there was always the beggars at the city gates.
Right.
This goes back a long ways.
Yes.
But I don't know whether or not these beggars had homes or not. But during Jesus' time, which we get a lot of that type of imagery, especially around Easter and Christmas and these different times of the year. I know there was beggars and lepers and all that. There's always been issues that go back a long ways.
Right.
And once you get moved out of your Neolithic type existence, like Native Americans or whatever, but it doesn't have to be that way. And what exactly does the Knowing Me Ministries, how is it trying to obviously it's helping out by giving people their immediate needs, but what are you folks able to do to try to do more long term? Because as we've talked, sometimes these short term solutions make for long term problems.
Right. There's a couple ways we're doing it. One of the short things, I'm working on a book right now. I'm writing a book on justice, and so I'm trying to use that medium to get word out and say, look, pay attention. Like one of the disconnections you were talking about earlier is, an example, we talk about child slave labor in other countries, but we don't know that when we buy something at certain stores, we're contributing to that. We're giving money to empower those people to hold those children in slavery in China by buying those certain products. So there's that disconnect. So we're trying to get word out through that. I talk about some of those things in this book. The other thing is that we approach each person individually as they're uniquely made up, and also we try to take a holistic approach to the person, because each person's unique and they have various needs that are contributing to their situation. Or causing their either homelessness or poverty, because we do work with some people who aren't homeless yet, but they're headed that way, to try to prevent it. And so we take the holistic approach and don't really buy into the philosophy that housing is what the homeless need, because if it was, then there would be no homelessness, because these people weren't born homeless, they were raised in a house. And some of them, for a good part of their adulthood, was in a house.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, if housing solved homelessness, there would be no homeless, because they already had the housing before that.
They would never have been turned out, so
right.
to speak.
So we look at the other issues, the roots of what's going on. Is there mental illness? Is there a physical illness that's causing this? Is there the forces of society? Are there, like some people committed a very small misdemeanor crime and they're still paying fines years later on those things. So we're looking at how can we help them just overcome those fines, and just a myriad of things with each individual person to get them out of that situation, so that once they're off the streets, they stay off the streets. So yeah.
What you're saying there is struck. The forces of society that keep people, that create homelessness, fines was a good one, but it's also medical bills too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, there are other things that force people to lose what they have, because unless you're fairly well off, you're 2 or 3 paychecks from homelessness.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to get by more than 1 or 2 months without paying your rent. Or maybe more so with your house payment, but still, it's there's a lot of forces out there that are working against us, because each one of us, each one of us is an individual system within a number of different kinds of systems, municipal systems, federal systems. Right. Some of us are involved in religious systems, right. And these all interconnect, but they can break down.
Yeah.
And I imagine that you've heard some stories of some folks that from different aspects of one of those systems breaks down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then once it happens, it's like a domino effect, because you're discouraged and trying to fight this thing, which then causes this system to rise up, because for example, maybe you missed a bill, and so you're trying to help satisfy that company, and in the process of pulling money to satisfy maybe your cell phone carrier because you fell behind. Now you're falling behind on a car payment, and now they're after you. It's just that domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens in many ways with people, and it's just sad to see those things happen.
The complicationness of it. And like you say, you mentioned cell phone. Well, there might be some folks out there that are homeless that have a cell phone, but it's almost to the point, like I said, you need a credit card. You need some way for people to contact you in order to to perform your job correctly, or to even find a job correctly. And I know that I've had folks in here from R2D2 that provide some of those services where they have computers that people can look for work, and they have addresses where people can be contacted that are looking for work.
Exactly.
And it isn't like you just go out and go open up the want ads and put in your resume anymore. It's become so complicated.
Yeah.
And do you provide services?
Yes. Yeah, and we work with various other organizations and individuals, and trying to connect those people in various ways. It'd be a bit cumbersome for us to provide all those services ourselves. So
Sure.
We just work with people who may provide this one service, while other organizations provide different ones. And so we look at the person and say, well, let's connect you here, and let's connect you there as well, and we'll work together to to help you out. So really what we're about is not about being a service provider, but about being that friend who meets you on the street and walks you through all of that, and helping like knock down obstacles along the way, and stuff. And you mentioned R2D2. I really like what they're doing, because they are doing those things, and they're not doing it, again, like I said, with the solution of housing, because they don't provide housing for people. They provide a safe place for them to camp, and then help them get out of that, and then they eventually get the housing because they've gotten all those other pieces in place.
Sure, it's not necessarily a homeless camp, it's a transition camp.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is important. Well, you know, there's an awful lot of organizations, you know, whether they're church or government or whatever, that are giving handouts, which is important, but there's more of them, I think, that are more focused on a hand up.
Yeah,
and it seems to me, if you're out there pointing the way to different resources, you're giving hands up.
Yeah.
And part of that would be going places where they can get a handout, the soup kitchens or whatever, like was in that video. The guy was astounded about the lines. You know, there's one right on not on Burnside, but on MLK that I see coming to the studio.
Yeah.
Sometimes the line will be half a block long.
Right.
And it's important that people have that availability. I mean, you know, it's really hard to help your situation if you're hungry. And I know that a lot of folks, when we come on talking about kids in school, like during the union situations lately, some of these kids are going to school hungry. They can't learn.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if you're hungry, you certainly can't provide yourself with a proper whatever you need to do in order to find work or even get to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've done that sometimes. Like if I have some money on me, I'll get somebody a sub or something so they can eat, because they can't hear what I have to say if they're thinking about their stomach.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And the fact that somebody would take the time to do that too.
Yeah, exactly. It gains your respect and attention. Yeah, when you do that.
And so this is all done by your Knowing Me Ministries.
Yes.
Now, is that located in a specific church, or is that just a ministry of people that are helping out?
Yeah, it is. No, it's just a ministry of people that are helping out, and it's all street level. We don't have an office or anything. I mean, out of my home, you know, we have a computer and a makeshift office, but honestly, a lot of it's just street level work and just being there with the people daily, right where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are Knowing Me Ministries.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's great. And you know, we're down a little over, close to 12 minutes or so. We can continue the conversation. And if folks want to put the phone number up here, and we can invite you to join the conversation. You might want to talk about your perspective of the roots of poverty and homelessness. Yeah. I mean, it's not something that's a small subject, and you may have specific questions about Mike's work. There's an awful lot to talk about there too as well, and so we'll just move along. If you have any questions, we'll get the high sign from the control room, and then we'll bring you right on. And I hope we have comments or questions. There's an awful lot to be learned from folks out there, because we all probably know someone who has lost their jobs and ended up on the street, however temporarily or longer than that. It's something that's happened to more and more people, and it happens to families too. I forget, you have any rule of percentages of the amount of homelessness in the city that's families?
Yeah, I get that asked that a lot, and that is a really hard one to know, because families couch surf and they sleep in a car, and they just try to find anywhere where they can hide. Because when you have a family, my family and I were homeless for a year and a half. And, you do everything you can to hide, because you don't know, what agency or whatever is going to find out, and then maybe you lose your kids or whatever. You don't know what the possibilities are.
That's something I didn't factor in. That's right.
Yeah, so families hide a lot. And so, I mean, obviously there's shelters out there for families, but they can only hold so many families. And so it is really hard to even know what that number would be. But I would say it's something that would probably blow our mind if we knew how many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the shelters, I mean, they're important. There have to be shelters. But, you have people that are transient, and they're going to bring in all kinds of things.
Yes,
a lot of people
yeah.
won't go to one of those because just by the nature of it, they can clean them, but there's stuff out there that's it's pretty scary stuff.
And some people can't handle the mental stress. Like if somebody's dealing with a mental illness, they can't handle the stress of a shelter, being around that many people and whatnot.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
I see we have a phone call. First caller, you're on the air. First one's kind of bumpy sometimes. First caller. I see they're pushing buttons in there, so they're working on that. Hopefully we'll get that comment or that question.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just so many issues that aspects of this that. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, you're on the air. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, this is Kevin, Jim.
Oh, Kevin.
I'm a good friend with Pastor Mike. I told him I watched the show tonight.
All right.
Anyway, I think you guys are doing I think Mike is doing a real good job with that, and I also think that your show is real good too, Jim.
Oh, thank you.
And I know what it's like to be homeless. Whoop.
I hope that was a temporary condition.
It was. Whoop. I just lost you.
Oh, I think you're still there.
Oh, okay. Well, the audio went out. I couldn't hear what you were saying. Anyway, I was homeless for like maybe 2 or 3 months, and I know what it's like to be out in the cold, and I think that our government should look at the homeless people as people instead of just another thing to brush aside, because it's wrong to do what they're doing, and some of these people can't even pay for health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think what Mike's doing is real good, and I happen to know him very well because he used to do my program, The Given Word, and I know what it's like to be on the street, and it's not good. In fact, when I was working at St. Vinny's, I had a dream that I was the President of the United States, and I made all these provisions for the homeless people.
It could be done.
Yeah.
The money
I know
would
it
piss
can.
off on other
Yeah,
things.
I just wish it would be done.
Yeah.
Because that's what's wrong with society today. They think of homeless people as being drunk and stupid, and they're not. They're ordinary people that happen to have a little problem with,
Right.
Like Mike said, some of them are mentally ill. I'm that way. I have a mental condition, and I was forced to live on the street for about 3 days, and then I was taken in by a friend, and then he let me out in the cold.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, but other than that, I'm doing a lot better now than I was, say, about 10 years ago.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Well,
And
you were able to get in better shape because of the assistance that you found from people like Mike.
That's right.
Yeah, and I
Right,
appreciate
that's
that call
absolutely
in there, Kevin, as well, because I do know Kevin very well. And a couple things he brought up is that we tend to look at the homeless as numbers. How many there are, how many we've helped, and all those stuff. Instead of looking at each individual as a person, who really has feelings and emotions and dreams and pain as well that they deal with. And so we got to really start looking at them as that way. And like Kevin was talking about, sleeping out in the cold. We got to realize on these cold nights when we can turn on a heater, they can't, and it's miserable.
And there's places in this country that are colder than here.
Oh yeah, I don't know how they survive in Chicago and
I don't
places
either.
like that. Yeah.
So, well, I appreciate the call and the comments.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
All right, thank
you.
you.
Guys are doing a real good service.
All right.
Thanks.
What he talked about reminded me of something. People are embarrassed by people being homeless.
Right.
Maybe they don't know how to react or whatever.
Right.
And there was something on TV the other night, I forget what it was, CNN or whatever. But these folks called up some people, they got them, and they dressed them up as homeless, and somehow they arranged it so they would be where some of their relatives would walk by.
Oh yeah.
Did you hear about that?
I did not.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
some one man or woman walked right by their spouse. and they weren't with their head down and they couldn't be seen. They were just dressed homeless, sitting there. And a person walked by their spouse, persons walked by their brothers, because they're not looking at them.
Right.
They're looking the other way.
Yeah.
And I know someone says that they always try to look them in the eye, and I always felt I don't know if that's really a good thing to do. Maybe that would put the homeless person on a spot, but you got to recognize their humanity.
Yeah, and I
think that is a good way to do that.
Contact, yeah, with them, and just say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Just try to initiate something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was taught. You mentioned a couple times tonight religious organizations and stuff, and being a pastor, of course, I work talk at and work with churches a lot, and I think one of the things is churches have got to start questioning themselves and start thinking of how they're, like you said, pissing off money, for these fancy buildings and for this
that's always bugged
thing
me.
And that thing. And like there's a church in Canby that I was really glad to hear about, that they're downsizing their structures and they're asking all of the staff to cut their salaries down so that they can help the poor more. That's a good example. Churches need to start thinking, because a lot, just like we talk about the government wasting money, churches can be just as guilty of wasting. And they need to start questioning themselves and think of how can we make cutbacks so that we can lift the poor up.
I think about while you were talking, I think about someone who gets rich, a rock star, whatever, they buy $5 million mansions. When a church gets started, what do? They build an enormous church.
Yeah.
And what always comes to mind, and I'm not faulting them in particular, but it always comes to mind is Salt Lake City and the Mormons.
Oh yeah,
look at this enormous thing. My God, how many? But they've got a lot of money. Maybe they do help the poor or whatever. I don't know. But is it really necessary to have that? That is presumptuous to me to be out there with that. I mean, but that it gets back to religions are part of society. And society has that mechanism where they want to put that on there and build them gigantic edifices, whether it's architectural or prestige or whatever. It's the same thing, and that is done at the cost and the expense of other people in other areas.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not necessarily tit for tat, but it ultimately works out that way. It is an equation, it seems to me.
Yeah, and unfortunately a lot of that is, you said, at the expense of other people, especially the poor who may contribute money and tithes and offerings, which is interesting. The tithe comes from the Old Testament, where it was basically the income tax for Israel, but it's interesting to note that the poor were exempt from paying that. So, but I don't see a lot of churches telling the poor, "Oh, you don't have to give."
They want 10%.
Yeah,
something like
exactly.
that. Well, if it depends on what they do with that 10%. Now we're down to about 1:42. It went pretty quick.
Yeah.
Extra quick, because we didn't have the whole hour. But the Mike Davis is with Knowing Me Ministries, and they work with the homeless. I don't know if that's all you do.
Well, we work some with abused women because some of them become homeless. And
just to get away from it.
Right, and we work all over the city. I just kind of concentrate in areas just because of limited time and resources, but we do work all over the city wherever, because people find out about me and they find my phone number and call me. So we work all over the city. We work with abused women, as I said, and to a limited basis with women who work the streets as well.
The sex workers.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about that. Well, we're down to 50 seconds. The show's just about over here. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Mike. We'll do this again, in the future. You can maybe bring us up to ODOT or up to date with ODOT, the lawsuit, or what's going on. And I really appreciate the little conversation we've had about the roots of poverty, and it's something people need to pay attention to. It's homelessness is a function of society. It's not a function of poverty or people being weak or stupid or insane or lazy. It's a function of the whole society. It's not just part of it. And then there's no way that we're going to be able to fix homelessness as a Band-Aid. We have to deal with society as a whole.
Exactly.
I would think, to me. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, folks.